So, hi Sam, and welcome to the show. This is the Branded Content Marketing Association's podcast, the future of branded content marketing and PR. And you are the guru of data and storytelling and psychology all combined in one. So it's really a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show. You're also the author of one of a very interesting and unusual books on storytelling with data. So tell us a little bit about how you got here from there. I know your story is
quickly concluded and then massively overcompensated and became a statistics teacher for many, many years.
Wow.
I quickly decided or discovered for me that statistics, the use of simple correlations to understand relationships, cause and effect sometimes, or sometimes just correlation relationships, to determine relationships, to tease out factors, was just another language. It was just another way of using or creating stories out of numbers. So I went back into consultancy. I became a father. I needed to provide for my family. Went back into consultancy. And suddenly 2004, 5, 6, Twitter, Facebook come about. Data enters communications. Now, having been a PR man for 25 years, I can, with some justification, say that a lot of people who work in PR in the Anglo-American market, which is the market I know best, are rank amateurs. They have no professional qualifications. They have degrees in classics, but they don't have professional qualifications, and they certainly are not often very numerate. They like story. They're quite an empathetic bunch often, but they're not very numerate. They don't like a scientific paper. I loved them. I left them up. So everyone gave that, and I became in an agency that was doing a lot of global work with Unilever, with Hindustan Lever as well. Was doing a lot of work around behavioral change. So I helped to build models of behavior change that used the principles of behavioral psychology to give people the information, the motivation, and the behavioral skills they need to change their behavior. Not just about telling people, but encouraging them. Showing them, if you're a newly urbanized person who's been from generations of rural, why is it that your children should wash their hands at key meal times? Because they won't get sick as often, because they'll do well at school, and they'll go on to have the life that you. So it was those type of campaigns. Doing a lot of work with Lifebuoy and Unilever Oral Care. Anyway, I then worked in a number of analytics businesses, and just under 6 years ago, I decided I wanted to be self-determining. There's an American writer, Dan Pink, written a number of books, spoken where we are today in the Royal Society of Arts in London, spoken here a number of times. He's written a number of books, particularly one that talks about called Drive, about human motivation and behavior, that talks about the autonomy, the mastery, and the purpose. That's his trifecta for having a great quality of work life. And this meant a lot to me. I'm going to become a data storyteller. Okay, data storyteller. Built some clients very quickly, as always happens when you set up you work with a former client there, you work with a former colleague there, somebody else moves, and built. People said, well, if you've been in business for a year, you'll be doing fine. So I said, I'm still here. And then they said, no, 3 years. I'm still here. 5, and I'm still here. Indeed, into the 6th year now. A lot of businesses don't realize, I think, particularly B2B businesses, don't realize that they need to talk human and sound like people. They believe that if they can, particularly in this world of big data, if they use a lot of information, they can browbeat their customers or their competitors in submission. I argue quite the contrary, and I work with my clients to help them to tell and to build fundamentally human stories that are underpinned by data. I don't believe in all of the post-truth fake news world. We don't need data. I think we need data more than ever. But it's not about leading with data. It's about using data to support the stories. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman, in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, talks about System 1, System 2 thinking. We make our decisions emotionally, and we justify those decisions and make them real rationally. So for me, I want to help my clients tell human stories about the benefits of working together in partnership or using this product, but the human stories, and then underpin those fundamentally with rational facts, but not too many. It's fundamentally about empathy and understanding how your audience is going to receive that message.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about your book. This amazing book that is so unique. After all, I mean, I've read maybe 20 books on storytelling, but most of the books are around the same, the hero and the the guide and the whole the standard structure of story. There's hardly any book talking about data and storytelling. So tell me about this book and.
So because I've got this, you're very kind about the book. I wanted to share some principles that I'd stumbled across. I have this chaotic, on one level, resume, CV. I do a degree here. I work for 12 years. I do 2 more degrees there. It's on one level, it's completely chaotic. But for me now, as a storyteller, I look back and I can tell you that it's all been planned. There are lots of books and podcasts and advice about story and story structure. So there's a Hollywood screenwriter, script doctor who I've been trained by, Robert McKee, who's amazing writer, does it fantastic. Really, on his training course, you spend 11.5 hours watching Casablanca to see every single move and every bit of emotion. Great work on story. There are lots of books that will take, the principles of story from Aristotle I was talking about before, that will take the principles from Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey, the 12 steps that you go around. Absolutely. But there are also more modern books on story that are very good, but they say, we've had enough of data. Data is getting in the way. Let's get rid of data. Let's get back to story. And then you look on the analytics side, and the analytics side there is how to code in R and Python and Java.
In fact, there's an entire podcast which says shut the PowerPoint, close the laptop, and tell a story. So so it indicates that you cut the data out and go more human and forget the data.
I completely agree that particularly corporations, particularly B2B, need to go more human. But I profoundly disagree that data and statistics are not the root of providing the evidence that we need to create and build sustainable stories. So there are lots of books on data visualization. There are lots of courses on data visualization and how to use data and present data in a more understandable way. But I couldn't quite believe. As I say, I have this unusual academic career stretching over a long time. Very academic family, that's why I had to do it. I had nephews and nieces who were younger than me who were called doctors, so I had that itch to scratch. But for me, it's entirely logical. As I say, when I had that penny-dropping moment, and I understood that by correlating variables and putting them into models, you could actually find something out that was objectively true and hidden. Absolutely. Of course, there are lots of pitfalls. You take lots of data sets, you put them all together in a statistical model, you get false positives. Yeah. You want to watch out for that. There's a fantastic both book and website called spuriouscorrelations.com. There's this Harvard law student called Tyler Vegan. He's been studying Harvard law for 15 years, but what he does is he goes and gets all of the publicly available data sets and he correlates the number of people who've died getting tangled in sheets with cheese consumption, or the divorce rate in Maine with butter and margarine, or sociology doctorates awarded in Nicolas Cage movies. It's nonsense. It's all nonsense. There are 30,000 correlations he's put together using public data sets. So, but I really thought that there was a niche to get people to understand how they could use data and statistics, and say, as this underpinning, this structure, this authority behind human storytelling. And fundamentally, the message of the book and the message of, I run a lot of training, but the fundamental message is, it's perfectly possible. You don't have to be a stats or a mathematical genius, but it's perfectly possible to use data and statistics to underpin your stories and to create more powerful, more purposeful, more effective stories. I argue that the reductionist, the scientist in me, thinks there's a simple equation of the modern knowledge economy, which is analytics plus storytelling equals influence. There's absolutely no point in doing any form of communication, I don't believe, if you're not trying to move people to action. Again, Dan Pink, the guy I was talking about in his book, To Sell is Human, he says we're all in the moving business. He doesn't mean we all work in removals companies. We're all persuaders. Whether we're a doctor who wants her patients to take drugs, whether we're a teacher who wants her patients to do homework because they'll get better exam results. For all of those reasons, we're all in the moving, persuading business. We need emotional stories, but they've got to be rooted in
Or a
truth.
man with his girlfriend trying to entice her to marry her.
Absolutely. So there's the emotional future of the happiness, and we'll be happy together. We'll have children together. We'll do all the things you want to do, and I'll be able to provide for you. There are this many dollars or pounds or rupees that we're going to see us through. So it's the rational and the emotional. It's the balance. It's too pretentious to talk about it as being yin and yang, but I think that the powerful stories today, particularly in corporates and brands, and they can be in very abstract areas. They can be in tiny, kind of gene therapy, which may well revolutionise all cancer therapy, which is an amazing, profound story. But if on the bottom line, or you focus just on the data and you don't talk about the potential for humanity that this can unleash, you're missing a trick. So that's the book, and I mean, I'm a huge. I mean, I've mentioned Dan Pink and various other people. I'm a huge fan of the book. What I wanted to do was to take a message and to share it more broadly. And the fact that we're sitting on these steps here having this conversation is testament to that.
Now, so tell us a little bit about some learnings from the book. I'm sure people need to buy that book to get it couldn't be contained in 20 minutes of a podcast, but a 2-minute, 3-minute, how could people use data correctly?
So, I mean, I think there are many ways that they can do it. I mean, I've got 6 golden rules. I won't give you all 6. That'll give.
Okay, give us 2.
Okay, 2 golden rules. So, I mean, I've given you some already. I've talked about talking human, and that's very important. But finding and using relevant data. So, finding and using relevant data can be very hard in a big data world where there are so many potential data sources. Training yourself and learning what is going to be relevant and what isn't, what you need to put together, what you don't. That's that's I think a real skill. Talking human. So talking human, realizing that if you don't talk in a human way, you're not going to be able to convince other humans to take action. The curse of knowledge. Okay, so the Harvard professor of psychology, Steve Pinker, written lots of books about language and language acquisition. He was MIT with Chomsky. He was the heir apparent for Chomsky until he was taken by Harvard. Great public intellectual, done a lot of stuff about violence in society now, going into a different direction. He's written a beautiful, quite a fat book called The Sense of Style. And in The Sense of Style, he talks a lot about this thing, the curse of knowledge. So I think one of the things for communicators in agencies and also in-house, one of the things they need to realize, this is particularly true of market researchers, when you know a lot about a subject matter, an area, it's very hard to unlearn what you know. And in your communication, it's very hard to not appreciate that everybody doesn't know this. Now, Pinker in his book, The Sense of Style, he talks a lot about, he names and shames a number of areas. So one of those areas is academia. Mm-hmm. My business partner and I do a lot of work with academics, I particularly in business schools and so on, but she across a whole range, getting them to find and express the real world impact of their academic work. That's very important to funding bodies.
But it's scary as well.
It's scary, but
scary for them, because if the results come out that you're in this cocoon and you feel that there's a huge impact of your academic work, and often, if I may say, be a little bold, that it may not have any impact on the academic world. So
it may not. It may not. But as I say, we do a lot of work with them. But so Pinker points the finger that academics are the worst, the single worst at using jargon. So it's no surprise for you for me to say that when you're using data and statistics, you need to kind of keep it simple yet smart. You need to use very simple language, particularly if there's a data-rich part of the story that you're telling. Use simple language. I mean, it is perfectly possible. There are algorithms that are available online where you can take the text that you write and you can analyze that, and you can see how many years of continuous education you would need to have passed through in order to be able to understand it at first reading.
Yeah.
And what you want to aim for,
like headline analyzers.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly, absolutely. But you can do this for the whole text.
Yeah.
I write a lot for my clients, and I run all of the stuff I put. What you want to aim for is about just the end of primary school, beginning of secondary school, 10, 11, right?
I thought it was 3 or 5 or something. That's what is considered a good.
It depends on the algorithm.
Right.
But if you're using data, and a lot of people find numbers challenging, if you're using data, it's really, really important that your language is simple and comprehensible. So, the objective of creating clarity in your work, I think, is really important. But the curse of knowledge. So we have academics, we have people who work in finance. Some people argue that the entire legal profession exists because people are able to confuse you using Latin words and technical terms, technical areas, scientists, all of these who have great stories to tell about new heart pacemakers, or I'm working with a company that's doing some work in recycling of previously unrecyclable products like tires and so on. Amazing! Gosh, isn't that extraordinary? Been so polluting. If you don't talk about the human benefit, another area, there's a lot of talk about kind of corporate and brand purpose these days. A lot of talk about sustainability and what sustainability means. If sustainability means that people in more developed parts of the world are benefiting from raw materials grown in less developed parts of the world. I've done lots of work, for example, with Lipton in Africa and in the Indian subcontinent. It can't just be about creating a greener cup of tea. It needs to be about providing social benefit to the growing areas and economic benefit to the growing areas. Then you kind of think about win-win-win. You've got this amazing opportunity that it's not about exploitation anymore. We're kind of post-colonial, but there are too many businesses that, and particularly maybe in the palm oil area, in Indonesia and so on, where that message just hasn't quite yet got through to their Swiss or German or North American headquarters. And I think that there's a real risk there if you don't understand that, if you don't understand the type of human stories you need to tell. But also, if you aren't aware of this curse of knowledge, if you think, if I just put one of my scientists in his or her white coats in front of the media, we'll be fine. No, you won't be fine. You need to tell human stories and engage people properly, get them to understand at an emotional level, and then support those stories with the rational underpinning.
Wow, there's so much to learn, but I really wanted to ask you one question, because you snipped over it quite a few times during our conversation. But which are your best books, which, apart from the one, of course, that you've written, which are the ones you recommend people should read about? I've seen that your reading spans from Aristotle and Plato to storytelling to data to philosophy. So give us a few recommendations of the best books that you would like people to read, apart from your own. Okay, well, that's very kind. Let's start with your book, the complete title and So there's one. There's the first, which is Narrative by Numbers: How to Tell Powerful and Purposeful Stories with Data. Available worldwide from Routledge. I'm following that up this year with another book on insight, how to be insightful. Actually, it'll be out next year. It's a logical sequel. I think the third book will probably be about strategy, but those are in the future. The best data visualizer, and I think data storyteller possibly, that there's ever been, sadly died a couple of years ago. It's a man called Hans Rosling. Hans Rosling was a very impish Swedish public health guy who was able to visualize 6 or 7 dimensions in just 2 dimensions through some software he created and then sold to Google in the late 2000s called Gapminder. Now, there is a thing called the Gapminder Foundation that Rosling's son and his daughter-in-law still run. They published last year a book called Factfulness. Factfulness is a book that looks at actually the very positive stories there are in public health around the world. And they visualize and talk about the way that advances are being made and talk about how to talk about them, how to use data to talk about public health. And that book, Bill Gates last year bought a copy of that book, a physical copy of that book, for everybody graduating from a North American university. I think that's an extraordinarily brilliant thing for him to have done, because actually being able to call on whether data is being used intelligently, honestly or not, which is at the heart of this book, Factfulness, is a really important skill. I don't think there are many places in the world that teach that. So I think Factfulness is one of my favourites. Robert McKee, this Hollywood scriptwriter's Story. If you want to know how to tell a story, Robert McKee's Story is a really good one. I've also mentioned him in context of a couple of his books already, Dan Pink. He's just, at the beginning of last year, just published a book called When,
and when is Dan Pink's is a bit like a kind of Malcolm Gladwell figure, and anything by Gladwell is clearly worth reading. But Malcolm Gladwell, but he's a bit. It's not fair to say he's lower grade. He's less academic. He's more practical. But when shows you when during the day you should do things based on what psychology, sociology, economics tells you. And what is interesting, I think, particularly interesting, about lots of interesting things about this book. Okay, one of them, 2 tips in that book. One is to have a nappuccino. So a nappuccino is, we have a natural biorhythmic dip after lunchtime, typically. Right. Owls and larks happens different times. So what to do, often you've had a sandwich, you have a bit of a yawn. Lunchtime, it's familiar to many people. What Pink recommends and what the science shows in this book is that caffeine takes about 25 minutes to hit. So have a double espresso, put on an eye mask, put on some noise cancelling headphones, lie down, set an alarm for 25 minutes, because you probably won't fall asleep when you start doing this. But actually, you may well just be so relaxed so that when you wake up or when your alarm goes off after 25 minutes, you haven't allowed yourself to go into deep sleep, but also the caffeine has just kicked in, because that's how long it takes to kick in. So you fly through the rest of the day.
Wow.
It really works. The other thing that he talks about is the natural biorhythm of the day. Most people in office environments around the world they start on their emails and they may never get beyond them, right? That is the time you should be doing your creative writing work. When you kind of peak before lunchtime and you're in a recovery period, that's when you should do your emails. And then when you're kind of recovering later on, he shows quite clearly that's when you should do your insight work, when your mind is slightly freer. So Dan Pink's great, Robin McKee's great. I mean, I could go on and on about books. I'm a bit of a book bore, but I think that there's a lot to be learned from books. As I say, actually, there's a on data visualization. There's a woman called Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic. She's a former Googler. She's got a book called Storytelling with Data, and to be fair, it's not much about storytelling. She talks a bit about Aristotle, she talks a bit about story structure, but what she's brilliant at is how to present a chart. And I've not come across a better book on how to strip irrelevant information out, how to use just maybe on a slide, just a big number, present it in a big font, and then to how to use data in a visual way that really gets people to pay attention to it. She's a former Googler, so she comes with a great heritage. She's a great trainer. Her courses, I haven't been on one of her courses, but I've experienced them online, and they're really good. So there's a half a dozen books for your
Wow.
listeners.
So, I mean, we could go on and on. I don't know where to stop. And I even though we have crossed the standard time for our podcast, I didn't want to stop, because there's so much of learning in every minute that you speak. But we have to stop somewhere, and I think the rest of the listeners will be able to get more out of your book, and probably following your podcasts and the various ways in which you are online. So, but thank you so much, Sam, for taking out the time, and it was so much of a learning. It's one of my best podcasts ever, and I'll say this on record. And so thank you so much, and it was brilliant talking to you.
What a huge pleasure. Thank you too.
Thank you.